Junk Reanimator. Arguably the best deck, but debatable on your left.
Not necessarily the best deck, but the most defining deck in the format. The one you're most likely to see multiple times in the tournament. The type of deck that a lot of better players are going to gravitate towards. And so,
also, I think a deck that when you're building or selecting whatever deck you're going to play, you build your sideboard or your main deck with this deck in mind.
Yes.
I don't think you can say that about every deck in the format, but when you are actually preparing to come to a standard tournament nowadays, I think number one question that you ask yourself is, can I beat Junk Reanimator, or what cards do I want against Junk Reanimator?
Yeah, and I think that the best tools are to either be very quick or to be able to attack the graveyard effectively in post-board games. Those, I think, are the recipes for success. Between Mulch and Grizzly Salvage, this deck can actually stay kind of up with cards, even against some control decks.
Yeah.
So you can't necessarily just out attrition them, because they can actually play that game fairly effectively as well, and just start casting their awesome 5 and 6, 7 mana creatures.
Yeah, that's the scary thing, is that they can actually, as you said, they can actually hard cast those Angel Serenities, whatever, you know, if they elect to have a 6 mana spell in their deck for whatever reason, you know, they don't have a problem actually casting these cards and starting the acidic slime chain as well, which is something that's probably going to be commonplace this weekend. So we are underway here, round 1 of Grand Prix Miami. We appreciate you guys joining us. Feel free to join us on Twitter and interact with Patrick and I and Osip when he comes in the booth beginning next round at SCGLive. Hashtag GP Miami for your tweets. We'll be checking them all weekend long. We want to see it. We want to hear from you guys.
Let's see. Flores lead off with a turn 1 Mountain and a Rakdos Cackler. Carlos with a tapped Overgrown Tomb. See what kind of follow-up Flores has here.
Second land is key. You see Burning Emissary already over there too in his hand. So we're going to see a free creature and a Madcap Skills.
And Madcap Skills actually very powerful against Carlos. Not a lot in the way of spot removal. Just 1 copy of Sever the Bloodline. The big risk here is if Carlos can find one of his copies of Fiend Hunter, but he doesn't even have corresponding double white yet. So this Madcap Skills is likely to do a ton of damage.
And now just passing the turn back, probably representing a Grizzly Salvage. You know, you want to look through the deck. Let's see if he has any spot removal at this point. The card you'll typically find here with that mana open is Abrupt Decay, but you don't find any of those in his main deck.
Yes, Carlos has access to 3 in the side, but none in his main deck.
So smooth sailing here for Flores is going to come across for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Plus the 5 from last turn. Going to put Melchor down to 8. There's the Grizzly Salvage, which we predictably thought would happen. Going to turn over an Overgrown Tomb, an Acidic Slime, a Mulch, another Acidic Slime, and an Arbor Elf. So the Elf is going to go to hand, and Carlos basically trying to catch back up in a hurry, but he is underneath a significant amount of pressure because of this Madcap Skills, which is so difficult to deal with for the Junk Reanimator deck.
Yes, and Flores is, I believe, sitting on 2 copies of Pillar of Flame in his hand, so it's going to be difficult for Carlos to even get 2 creatures in play to get in front of a creature with Madcap Skills on it. It's possible Carlos looking at his life total, trying to figure out how he's supposed to get out of this jam.
I mean, this is the one card you guys see on the screen, Madcap Skills, that has really kind of changed the landscape on the red decks, because it is this card where it is high risk, high reward. If you're right about Madcap Skills in the format, you're going to take the format by storm, because people can't really interact with it the way they want to. You know, in some matchups it's absolutely fantastic, as you're seeing right now, against a deck like Jund Midrange, or maybe in the Red Mirrors, where they have Pillar of Flames and various other ways to take care of it. It can be very, very poor. But in the matchups that it's good, it's absolutely great. And, you know, we've seen people kind of move towards this direction for red decks. And, you know, one of the things you don't often see, Patrick, is, you know, creature enchantments in constructing, because they're so risky to play, unless they're great ones like Unflinching Courage or Armadillo Cloak from years past, stuff like that. But to see a card like Madcap Skills kind of show up and have a huge impact on the format, and especially this game, is really interesting.
Yes.
And so now the Arbor Elf, again, can't block the Rakdos Cackler, so it has to jump in front of the Burning Emissary. And so now the Pillar of Flame is going to be coming upstairs. There's 1. There's 2, and that is going to end it. So Flores is going to be up a game.
Yeah, and even with a mulligan and missing colors of mana, just being on the play and having a good start was more than enough for Michael to take on that first game.
Yeah, and made it look pretty easy as well, as you said. On a mulligan, just only needed really 2 or 3 cards to win that game. So we're moving on to game number 2 here. Carlos's sideboard is the first one we're going to look at because he will be on the play this game. So what do we see?
He's got a lot of action to bring in here. He has 3 copies of Abrupt Decay, 3 copies of Centaur Healer, 2 copies of Gaze of Granite, and an extra Sever the Bloodline if he wants to go that route. But he can... what's really important for Junk Reanimator to do in matchups like this is to be able to speed up the deck to get on the board a little bit faster. You don't need to be going all crazy with quick Angel Serenities and what have you to beat decks like Red Green Aggro. If you're just curving into Centaur Healer, Thragtusks, and then being able to use Unburial Rites kind of as a value card, that's going to be enough to give you the space you need to win the game. So the pressure on Carlos here is to speed up his deck and get on the ground a lot faster. You saw that game, I mean, he was just kind of fumbling around with Grizzly Salvages and Mulches, and just, that wasn't what the game was about. And he needs to be able to fight Flores a little bit faster on the ground and then let his powerful stuff take over from there.
And so it's all about, well, it sounds like to me, it's all about just kind of lowering your curve and actually being able to interact. It's funny to consider boarding out Angel of Serenity, you know, arguably the most powerful card in the deck, but again, if you can't actually get it into play, or the only way he's actually going to be able to get it into play, excuse me, is like via Unburial Rites and some good Grizzly Salvage and mulching, then you probably have to sideboard it out.
Yeah, it's very rare that you actually need Angel of Serenity specifically to win games. Assuming you're kind of keeping your head above water with other stuff, Thragtusk or 2 Thragtusks are usually enough to just lock the game down.
Sure. And
they're also reasonable to just hard cast. Sure. So you want that to be much more of your plan than to try to be going crazy with trying to get to a fast Angel of Serenity.
We take a look at Flores' sideboard here. You're going to see 4 Volcanic Strength, 3 copies of Mizium Mortars, 3 Electrickery, 3 Skullcrack, and 2 Mark of Mutiny. Of these cards, you know, the ones that really do kind of stand out are the 2 Mark of Mutinies, and potentially Skullcrack. But Skullcrack is this interesting dynamic where, again, it's this card that you have to have at the right time and the mana up to be able to actually cast it. You see Melchor's sideboard. He has, you know, copies of Centaur Healer there, Deathrite Shaman. He has Thragtusk in his main deck. Is Flores going to be able to actually have the mana up and the time to have Skullcrack actually be a backbreaker in this particular matchup?
It's I don't like it a lot here, especially since Flores has a couple copies of Domri Red in his deck, and I think there's a huge opportunity cost into bringing spells into your deck that have the chance of not being very good when Domri is part of what you're doing. You want to be as creature dense as possible. Mark Immunity, to me, the upside there is obvious, especially a deck without much in the way of sweepers. If Carlos is trying to stabilize the game with creatures, particularly Thragtusk, then Mark Immunity can be awesome there, no questions asked. Skullcrack might be much more about beating Sphinx's Revelation decks and not so much about, or possibly, you know, decks like Jund. Carlos is going to have some life gain creatures, but I think there's a pretty big risk in playing the game that way. It's very hard to have 2 mana up while you're doing other things, and the Junk Reanimator deck can kind of overpower a couple random Skullcracks if you're not playing efficiently to the board. So I would question it here, but that said, Carlos does have, you know, Thragtusk, and it's reasonable to anticipate Centaur Healer as well. That's a common sideboard card. So I can understand Michael feeling like he wants to bring it in here, but I would be, if I were in his shoes, I'd be hesitant to bring it in.
And the only other card that really does stand out to you, Flores playing to the camera a little bit here, enjoying his round 1 feature match, is Mizium Mortars, which is, again, a card where it kind of suffers from the same problems as Skullcrack does, in which, you know, you would like to bring that card in to kind of clear some things out of the way, but can you afford to invest a card and put it into your deck that can't go upstairs and deal damage? It serves a purpose, but is the purpose that it's serving, you know, is it good enough? Is it efficient enough to actually invest a slot or a couple into?
Yeah, this is the challenge that I believe beatdown decks often have, and I believe the most common mistake that I see on camera are beatdown decks that over sideboard for control matchups and have to remove too much of their aggressiveness from their deck to do it, because you still have to keep your core curve and ability to threaten lethal very quickly, and you can back that up with slightly better threats or a couple haymakers, like I believe Mark of Mutiny can be in this kind of matchup. But it's very challenging to bring in 8 reactive cards and be able to keep enough of the core strategy of your deck intact. So when I'm sideboarding when I'm building beatdown decks, I often want to have 2 or 3 sort of powerful cards for the control matchup, so I don't have to take out that much stuff, because you still need to be fast to beat more powerful decks. Sure. If you're playing another beatdown mirror and then having a conversion where you turn to a much more slower, control-oriented build for the matchup, that's fine, and that's worth committing 8, sometimes 10 sideboard slots to. But for beating control decks, if you're bringing in 8 kind of reactive cards like Skullcrack, Mizium Mortars, and Mark Immunity are in this matchup, you risk just drawing up hands that don't hit the board fast enough to overpower Carlos before he starts getting his really powerful stuff going.
So that'll be the kind of question this game is, how does Flores kind of sideboard? Because I think, you know, if you're Flores in this situation, you've probably got a pretty good idea of what Melchor has access to. You know, you're probably going to expect some sort of removal, be it Abrupt Decay, be it Sever the Bloodline, whatever. You know, Junk Reanimator typically has some number of removal spells on the sideboard, so those are probably coming in. You're probably hoping that Centaur Healers aren't in his sideboard or in his main deck or somewhere throughout his 75, but it's probably likely that those are there as well. And then some other options do exist. Deathrite Shaman is a common sideboard card that can actually play a role in this matchup as well. So Flores has to make the decision of how he wants to sideboard, given that he's not working with perfect information, but he's probably working with information that he has from playing matches prior to this, and playing against Junk Reanimator at some point in his lifespan of playing red-green aggro, and how he wants to sideboard for the matchup.
And the toughest thing is that Junk Reanimator has a ton of, you know, different colors of mana and things it can be doing. So it's not, you can never be confident what the 75 looks like because there's so many options that deck has access to.
All right, and you already see a Deathrite Shaman in Melchor's hand, so he has brought those in, and a Centaur Healer. So this looks like a very, very nice start. Lands are being pulled forward. You see a Forest, you see a Godless Shrine. Does have Angel Serenity in his hand, a card that we thought he may sideboard out. It looks like he's going to leave in, as Flores is taking a mulligan at least down to 6 here.
I believe that Flores drew up a hand that actually had lands and spells, but simply was not fast enough.
Okay.
I think that he had Flinthoof, Boros Reckoner, another 3, or something like that. If that was actually the texture of his hand, that shows a lot of discipline mulliganing that. A lot of players, when they drop a hand of lands and the right colors of mana and some spells, are going to keep over 99% of the time. And having the discipline to say, you know what, I can't win this matchup if the first thing that I'm doing is turn 3, you know, on the draw, I got to send this one back.
So that brings in the question, you know, aggressively mulliganing with a red-based aggressive strategy, and how to go about doing it. You know, how aggressively do you mulligan? Do you have to have a 1-drop? You know, you take a look at Flores' deck list. He has 4 Strongkirk Nobles, 4 copies of Rakdos Cackler, so he has 8 1-drops, where we've seen red decks in the past, or a deck like Naya Zoo have 12. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how aggressively can you mulligan with a deck like this when you are in the Junk Reanimator matchup?
Well, with red aggressive decks, there's some matchups that are about individual card count, like mirror matches or decks with a lot of spot removal, and there's some matchups where they're just about winning as quickly as possible. The Junk Reanimator match is probably kind of in the middle of those two things, but closer to winning as fast as possible than individual card count. The Junk Reanimator deck is so overpowering once it gets its stuff going that being 6 cards and having a fast start is probably more important than having as many cards as possible, whereas a deck like Jund, which is a lot more spot removal based, is probably individual card counts are more important, and you would be more likely to keep slower hands.
You do see a mulligan here from 6. Flores taking a look at his hand right now. There's a Strongkirk Noble in there among lands, and he looks happy enough. So we are going to begin game number 2 here. And it's going to be a Godless Shrine pass. No Deathrite Shaman on turn 1. Could have played the Godless Shrine on tap, go down to 18, play the Shaman, but elects not to.
Showing a lot of value in preserving his life total.
Unburial Rights the draw step this turn from Melchor, so now he can establish a Deathrite Shaman, is going to play a Woodland Cemetery, and now here comes the Deathrite Shaman. So this is something that may seem a little bit minor, may seem a little bit major. How do you feel about this play of just not playing Shaman on turn 1 and taking damage to do so? Even has a Forest in his hand too, which he had from the beginning.
It depends if he thinks he's likely to have to play that isolated chapel, or sorry, the Godless Shrine rather. If he feels like he's likely to have to play that land untapped if he plays Deathrite Shaman on 1, it could be correct to do this. Okay. Especially since that Deathrite Shaman's not ramping him into anything. He doesn't have a land in the graveyard, there's no creatures, whatever. The Deathrite on 2 versus on 1 is probably about the same thing, and if he feels like he gets to preserve 2 damage somewhere down the line, that could be worth it.
So Madcap's skills on the Strongkirk Noble allows Flores to come across for 4 points of damage. Trigger from the Noble, gonna bring it up to 5 power, but Melchor with a huge draw on his turn. You see a Fiend Hunter in his hand, the Centaur Healer, but the draw for the turn was Abrupt Decay. So he's able to get himself out of a little bit of trouble here. But additionally, Patrick, the one thing that's kind of huge right now is now Deathrite Shaman's kind of online. He can start activating it, removing creatures, gaining life, get some of that life back that Flores is taking away. And that's where things actually begin to get pretty scary.
Yeah, and you can see sort of what we're talking about in the post board during sideboarding. Carlos, with Deathrite Shaman, Abrupt Decay, and Centaur Healer, is much faster to the board than he was in game 1, and that's very important for him in this matchup.
Flores is going to play a Stomping Ground untapped, going to push himself down to 18. You see his hand of Burning Tree Emissary, Flinthoof Boar, and a couple of mountains there, so kind of all in at this point. Burning Tree Emissary is going to generate that red and green mana for the Flinthoof Boar. Boar's going to come into play. I think it's likely we're going to see this little piggy get some haste here. You see the die is going to be put there, and Melchor isn't comfortable with that. There's a mountain in play. I think we're all aware that it is a 3/3 as opposed to a 2/2, so no reason to have that and misrepresent things. Gonna give the Boar haste, and gonna crash into the red zone here with the 2 creatures. But Abrupt Decay is gonna be on cleanup duty. There goes your Noble, so there is a 2-for-1. Bye-bye goes the Noble. Boar's gonna come across here. Now we're going to see, looks like a little bit of removal, but I don't know if I like the tapping of the mana there, because he could have tapped the Force and the Godless Shrine to cast the Abrupt Decay and then remove the Strongkirk Noble with the Woodland Cemetery to get 2 life back.
Yeah, to me it feels like you would want to lead by, you would want to ideally be using Deathrite Shaman to gain 2 life every turn, and there's the potential for a lot of creatures to die in the matchup, so I agree with you, I probably would have led there.
Grizzly salvaged the draw here from Melchor. You see the Centaur Healer at the front. Doesn't look like he has any more mana in his hand. You see he's got an Burial Rites and an Angel of Serenity to go along with the Fiend Hunter as well. So kind of some mana troubles at this point. Again, we know that Flores only has mountains left in his hand. Doesn't mean that he can't draw to something big like a Hell Rider, like a Gore Clan Rampager to kind of turn things around here. Heck, even another Madcap Skills wouldn't be so bad at this point.
Neither would Pillar of Flame or something to remove the Deathrite Shaman. Yeah. It would also be very valuable here. So Flores a little bit flooded, but has some big draws, especially now that Carlos is stumbling a little bit with mana. He's a little choked on action. He needs to make some land drops here.
Grizzly Salvage is going to turn over Restoration Angel, another Grizzly Salvage, an Abrupt Decay, a Sun Petal Grove, and a Fiend Hunter. So instead of just playing Centaur Healer and passing the turn back, Melchor has decided I need to try to hit a land drop. I'll Grizzly Salvage, turn over 5 cards, do find a Sun Petal Grove, but ideally what I think he was going for there, Patrick, I think he wanted to find 2 lands.
Yeah, ideally what he can do there is he flips over 2 lands, he can put 1 into his hand, keep 1 in the graveyard, and then have 3 mana to cast his Centaur Healer. So we can make a land drop that turn and develop his board. That Grizzly Salvage, a little unfortunate for him there. It does give a lot of creatures in the graveyard for Deathrite Shaman to gain life with, and he did hit a land drop, which is important, but not finding the second land there is a little unfortunate for him.
And you brought it up where Pillar of Flame would actually be a pretty good draw here to take care of Deathrite Shaman. That's exactly what Flores drew. The question now is he going to cash that in and try to take care of this Deathrite Shaman? It's going to come across. I think attacking first is a perfectly reasonable line of play. That Deathrite Shaman's certainly not going to be blocking here. So getting his 5 points of damage first is where Flores is going to start. And now the question is, do you just want to take care of the Deathrite Shaman, or do you want to save that pillar for something better? Is there even something better to save it for?
I mean, with the number of creatures that are in the graveyards at this point, I think that I feel like you probably have to just pillar there because there's the potential for that Deathrite Shaman to gain so much life.
So Deathrite is still on the table. Pillar of Flame being held for maybe a better target here by Flores. So Deathrite's going to remove the Strongkirk Noble, 2 life gained for Carlos, which basically what that means is not just 2 life gain, but it's 2 life gain now, 2 life gain later, and now Centaur Healer showing up to the party as well. And Melchor drew an Arbor Elf, so he can establish that this turn if he'd like to, or you can just keep Deathrite Shaman up and gain some more life. The world is his oyster, and he's just going to gain 2 more life, or at least represent a Deathrite Shaman activation on the following turn. Yeah,
and I like that play a lot from Carlos. There's no real need to tap out here because you're happy playing the game at the pace that's being played right now. You want to squeeze every ounce of value out of that Deathrite Shaman because it can just die at a moment's notice. And so I would definitely rather keep it up than you know, just tap out and add an Arbor Elf to the table.
So an attack now from both the creatures. Flores trying to cast that Pillar of Flame a little bit hastily. It is a sorcery, so that's not something that can happen. Melchor kind of backing up, correcting him on that. The attack stuff has to happen first, so damage is going to resolve. Burning Tree Emissary is going to bite the dust. Boar's going to come across for 3. Going to knock Melchor down to 10, and now Pillar of Flame can take care of Centaur Healer. Pretty important that Centaur Healer actually get exiled via Pillar of Flame instead of just placed into the graveyard.
Yes.
Doesn't allow Melchor to gain life from the Deathrite Shaman. He's actually just not going to Pillar Flame at all, so this is a little bit surprising as well.
Yeah. And now the pace of game is being played very much to Carlos's liking. He has a lot of breathing space. He's getting to the point where he can start casting a lot of his more powerful stuff. And You have to really like the position you're in if you're Carlos.
Arbrel's going to come down. Acidic Slime was the draw step here for Melchor for this turn. You also see a Fiend Hunter as well. And I think Fiend Huntering this Flinthoof Boar seems pretty reasonable. When you know your opponent has a Pillar of Flame in their hand, Fiend Hunter having 3 toughness, it's going to make it so that 2 spells are required, or at least a Searing Spear off of the top. And he can actually turn the corner and start to get aggressive here if you'd like to. But, you know, does he really want to shift gears yet is the question.
Yeah, there's still an argument for him to hang back on defense with his Deathrite Shaman and a Centaur Healer. He's happy to trade the Centaur Healer, I think, for Flinthoof Boar since he has Unburial Rites in hand, and he gets another activation of the Deathrite, so I'm a pretty big fan of hanging back here.
So a Domri Rad was the card that was drawn for the turn. And how does this change things for this game?
Well, Domri has the potential to pick off a lot of the mana creatures here if he wants to fight. It can also sort of get Flores back in the game in terms of raw card count. So there's 2 angles that Flores can take with this. I'm curious to see where he goes. Because I can see an argument for just playing Domri here and fighting the Arbor Elf and saying go.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely tell that Carlos is having some mana issues.
Yep.
It forces Centaur Healer's hand towards the Domri, which you're probably okay with as well. You know, it basically changes the way that Melchor has to play the game all by itself, which is part of the power of the Planeswalker.
Yep, and plussing Domri and playing that game is reasonable to me too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see what path he wants to go down.
So here is our Planeswalker.
If you're in Michael's position, I think. Okay, so we're gonna be going upstairs. It looks like.
So goes up, takes a look, doesn't hit. Doesn't mean it's a land. Could also be a spell. Again, Pillar of Flame, Searing Spear, additional Domri and Madcap skills are the cards that could be found here.
Plus the potential sideboard cards we spoke of during sideboarding, possibly Mark of Mutiny, Skullcrack, Mizzy, and Mortars. Those could all be in play as well. So I think you're likely to see a kill spell on this Flinthoof Boar and Carlos just taking out Domri, although I guess we're...
You see Acidic Slime, I'm going to take out the green source, okay. Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument for Fiend Huntering the Flinthoof Boar, or Abrupt Decaying it, which is what Melchor drew for the turn, and then finishing off the Domri that way. But what you see is Acidic Slime take out Flores' green source, which cuts him away from Flinthoof Boar and Goreclan Rampager. And now Centaur Healer is basically offering up a trade with Flinthoof Boar, which, you know, kind of plays into the plan that Melchor wants to play in because he does have that Umbrella Rights in his hand. But Domri just going to go down to 1 now.
Yeah. And I can understand that play being attractive from Carlos, cutting him off of green. We have the benefit of knowing that the last card in Michael's hand that turn was Stomping Ground, so Flores is probably actually not that upset that that's how the last turn played out.
Yeah. But Acidic Slime proving to be a problem now, again, because it does have Death Touch. Happy to trade with Flinthoof Boar if that thing's feeling frisky, I think.
Yeah. And again, this game is really demonstrating, in my opinion, Carlos's best recipe for winning the games is not to be too fancy, speed the deck up and play to the board. He can actually win an honest game against Flores' red-green aggro deck, assuming that he has enough, you know, he's able to accelerate into just his good 3s and 5s with some spot removal backup. Doesn't need to get too fancy, just play a conventional game and he can win that way.
The Searing Spear is going to take out Acidic Slime, and the Boar is going to come across here, basically conceding that Domri is no longer going to be useful, and Flores decided he's just probably going to let that go. You see him wanting to play that Stomping Ground, but does he want to give away the information that I have another green source? Do I want to get blown up by Acidic Slime? The answer is no. So he's going to pass back to Melchor, who has drawn another Angel of Serenity, which means that he has at least 2 of the 3 in his main deck in after sideboard.
Yeah, and you know, we spoke of speeding up the deck. I'm not really sure where he made room for some of this stuff. Maybe he cut some mulches, and I guess Sin Collector is an easy substitution as well, but...
So now Unburial Rights is going to target Acidic Slime, going to go after the lands yet again. So, you know, that play there of Unburial Rights on Acidic Slime is a little bit interesting because you have the option of getting back Restoration Angel and blinking, or at least attempting to blink your Centaur Healer, as opposed to trying to go after the mana base, which is something that you see people do with Junk Reanimator against, you know, Esper and Blue, White, Red. How do you like that strategy when you're playing against a red deck?
I can understand. I actually like that play just fine from Carlos because I think the card he's most worried about at this point is Thundermaw Hellkite.
Okay.
It's really the only thing that Flores can have that's powerful enough. It's challenging for him to block, and he doesn't have spot removal for it. So even though blinking out your Centaur Healer is very attractive there, I think long term your number one concern is getting punked out by Thundermaw Hellkite. So I don't mind choking him off of mana there.
Grizzly salvage here for Melchor. We're going to over a Woodland Cemetery, an Arbor Elf, a Restoration Angel, a Temple Garden, and the third Angel of Serenity. So those are 100% in after sideboard here for Melchor. And if you're Flores, you need to take that information with you for the next game. Because a lot of the times you're going to see people sideboard that card out. Unveil Rites is going to get flashed back now on Angel of Serenity. Assuming there is one down there, and there it is. So that's going to clear up that Flinthoof board and probably target a few things in Melchor sideboard as well. And once Angel of Serenity hits the table, it's very difficult for the red deck to actually be able to come back and win. That's why you see Mark of Mutiny oftentimes on the sideboard. But if you're Flores here, in what looks to be a game that is not going your way, and we're probably going to be playing a third game here, you have to keep in mind now that your opponent has access to at least 3 Angel of Serenities after sideboarding games.
I mean, the only thing that can really do is compel Flores to try to speed up this deck even further. You know, that's an argument for if you have Mizzing and Mortars in your deck, it's probably time to cut them. But I don't know if it's going to influence him too much because he should probably already be sideboarding kind of in that way.
So Carlos Melchor is going to win game number 2 here against Michael Flores. Junk Reanimator and Red Green Aggro are tied up right now, so we'll be going to a third game. And I actually want to look here at that bottom screen in the left-hand corner. I want to see if either player is going to go back to the well. Are either player going to go back to the sideboard, even to take a look, even if anything's even under consideration at this point?
Well, for me, the question mark for Flores is if he wants Madcap skills. He just saw spot removal get added, and he was playing against Abrupt Decay that game. Do you feel like it's not worth it to expose yourself to that kind of 2-for-1 versus the upside is obviously huge that we saw in the first game, and uncontested Madcap skills was very hard for Carlos to deal with. Madcap skills is also potentially good against some of Carlos's sideboard cards. For example, Madcap skills can do very good work against Centaur Healer. So that's the toughest question if I'm in Flores' shoes. That's the toughest question for me to answer.
You saw Flores was shuffling up, and now he's going back to the deck box. So is he going to change anything? Is this a bluff? Is he happy? Is he unhappy? He's certainly looking.
And I'm not sure how good Domri is in this matchup because I think incremental card advantage that Domri can provide is negligible in a matchup where your opponent's trying to go Centaur Healer, Restoration Angel, Thragtusk. I don't know if that's a way you can play the game. Because you're likely to get overwhelmed by those cards, even if Domri is hitting regularly. It can do some work fighting mana creatures, and so there's some upside there. But that's another card that I question its value in this matchup.
The question you have to ask yourself is, in a perfect world, let's say that Domri hits on the plus every turn, okay? Just create a hypothetical. It hits on the plus every turn. What are the creatures that it's drawing? In some decks, it's drawing, for Naya, it's drawing Voice of Resurgence, it's drawing Thundermaw Hellkite, it's drawing Boros Reckoner, it's drawing Hunt Master of the Fells. In this deck, I mean, we're looking at hits like Strongkirk Noble, Rakdos Cackler, Burning Emissary, where those cards are fantastic on turns 1 and 2, but you have no interest in finding those cards on turn 4, 5, 6, or 7. So is that even a hit? Do you even consider that hitting with Domri at that point? Yes, he does have Boros Reckoners of his own. Yes, Flores has 4 copies of Hellrider, 4 copies of Gorkline Rampager, so he certainly has some cards that he's certainly interested in drawing multiple copies of. But again, Domri, you have no control over that. Whatever creature you reveal is going to go to your hand. So, is that a card you want to invest in? As you said, there's certainly some gain to that card being able to take down one of those Arbor Elves or Absence Pilgrims. But do the good outweigh the bad in this situation? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't know. It also matches up very well against Fiend Hunter because Flores has so many 3/3s. So, there's spots where it's going to be incredible if he has it. But there's also spots where if he spends his third turn doing that instead of advancing his board, Carlos is going to be able to capitalize on that by just playing a normal game with quality creatures.
Yeah, and that's the big one, right? Is he going to be able to advance his board? Because again, as you said, you need against a Junk Reanimator deck is the part of the reason that people play red aggressive strategies against that deck is to kind of put the pedal to the metal and make it so they can never get established. Especially when you see now that Melchor does have those 3 copies of Angel of Serenity in his deck after sideboard. You want to knock him over as fast as you can, and don't let him get his feet set with Deathrite Shaman, as we saw last game, with Centaur Healer, any Restoration Angel shenanigans, any of that stuff you don't want to see happen. As we are back here in the booth, Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Grand Prix Miami, being brought to you guys by StarCityGames.com. We're taking a short break. Carlos is going to use the restroom really quickly for you guys as we analyze a game 3 here to see which one of these players is going to get their tournament off to a good start.
Yeah, and I think the 3 Angel of Serenity still being in Carlos' deck, if I'm in Michael Flores' position, I'm saying Domri's out of the deck because I need to be as fast as possible. I can't. Carlos has a build that's very powerful and slow, relatively speaking, in the post-board games. Obviously, he sped up his deck some amount with Abrupt Decay and Centaur Healer and Deathray Shaman and so forth, but I think you have to play a fast game, and Domri doesn't really fit into that.
So a question that we kind of brought up when we saw Flores take a mulligan for game 2, where we saw a hand where he had Flint of 4, he had Boros Reckoner, he had, we can assume the necessary lands to cast those cards, and decided to mulligan. Aggressively mulliganing with a red-based strategy is something, of course, you're very familiar with. What are your tips for that sort of thing? What are you looking for when you're, in general, and maybe even matchup specific here for aggressively mulliganing? Because I think that's kind of a skill where, as you said, you look at a hand with Flint of 4, Boros Reckoner, and necessary lands to cast it on the draw, and you're like, yeah, I can cast my spells, let's do it. But that's not actually going to lead to a win, most likely.
Yes. So with Lava Spike decks that are very spell-centric, I'm loath to mulligan because raw card count matters in every matchup. You're trying to assemble 20 points of damage, and every spell you draw is 3 or 4 points, and so they all matter. So I'm very likely to keep 1 land hands that are sort of dubious because A, the raw card count matters, and mulliganing can be such a disaster. When your deck is creatures and a few spells, and Michael Flores' deck definitely qualifies, then it becomes much more matchup specific. The matchups that are dictated by spot removal, I'm much more likely to keep hands that are light on mana and threat dense, because if my opponent's going to be trading 1-for-1 with a bunch of spot removal spells, again, the raw card count matters. In matchups where my opponent is trying to overpower me with things like Thragtusk, Restoration Angel, Centaur Healer, etc.,
Nightmare cards.
Yes. What matters is winning as quickly as possible and not about raw card count, because when this deck starts doing its thing, it's going to invalidate whatever you're doing. So you need to win very fast. In those matches, I'm much more inclined to mulligan because having a just the fastest curve possible is more important than having the most raw card count possible. So a lot of it's dictated by matchups. Against decks like Jund, for example, that are much more about playing spot removal and trying to stabilize that way, you can be a little bit slower and more threat dense because your individual cards are more likely to matter as the game proceeds. The more and more you're doing things like what Junk Reanimator is doing, the more and more like, all right, you drew 2 extra cards off your Domri, Angel of Serenity is worth 10 cards out of your deck. Doesn't matter. So what matters is winning as fast as possible. And then I'm, in those matchups, much more inclined to aggressively mulliganing, looking for the right curve.
It's a scary proposition where, I mean, naturally, we all play Magic. We don't want a mulligan. No one likes mulliganing. It sucks. But, for the purposes of the matchup and what you need to accomplish, again, I have myself been in situations where I have this hand of these cards I can cast, and then, I feel I keep like what is a perfectly reasonable opening hand, but my hand is not fast enough, and I kind of get rolled over by what my opponent is doing. And it's a strange thing where, you almost are priced in certain matchups to mulliganing for a 1-drop to get the ball rolling and just try to get your opponent on the back foot as fast as you can. And if you have to do that on 6 or potentially 5 cards to win the match, then that's something that you actually just have to do.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat a deck like Esper or Bant Control with your first play of the game being a Boros Reckoner. You cannot beat any real hand that way. You're way better off mulliganing for a hand that can get off the ground a little bit faster, because time is not on your side. You need to win as fast as possible, and the hands that aren't equipped to do that, you just have to be willing to mulligan, even if they're lands and spells, even if they're hands that you would keep if you didn't know what your opponent was up to. Once you have the information, you need to be looking for specific hands.
I think, with the red decks, when I play against these decks on Magic Online or I'm testing against them, I feel like they keep 2 certain types of hands. They either have a 1-drop hand that contains Rakdos, Cackler, Strongkirk, Noble, or if they don't play a 1-drop, that means the Burning Tree Emissaries are coming. Some number. I mean, 1, potentially 2, and then something to follow it up with. I think those are the 2 subset of hands that this deck can keep. I don't think that it's reasonable for the deck to be able to keep, as you said, a Flint of 4 Boros Reckoner start. Maybe on the play, since it's game 3 and Flores is going to be on the play, I think it might be a little more reasonable, but even then, you're kind of pushing it. You really are.
No, I think on the play, Flint Hoof Boar, Boros Reckoner, and reasonable support is an okay hand to keep on the play.
Okay.
I would probably not mulligan it. On the draw, I think you're just unlikely to beat any reasonable 7-card hand Carlos is keeping, if that's the kind of start that you have.
Okay.
So
let me ask you this question really quick as we wait for Carlos to come back into the feature match here, and we'll start doing game 3 for you guys momentarily. The 1-drops in this deck, Strong Noble, Rakdos, Cackler. You're playing against Chunk Reanimator. You're playing against a deck that has 4 Arborels, 4 Avacyn's Pilgrims. We've seen Deathrite Shaman as well. Which 1-drop do you want to start with?
I think that if you have a way to kill a mana creature, that you want to be leading with Noble, and if you don't, it's a much stronger argument to be leading with Rakdos Cackler.
Okay.
I think that, especially once you know about Deathrite Shaman being in the deck, I think if you have a Pillar of Flame, it's fine to lead with the Noble because you kind of want to get the ball rolling on that. You can get some good, you can actually get kind of a blowout draw with it if Carlos can't kill it. But if you don't have Pillar, then you are really risking Carlos is going Deathrite Shaman go and you not being able to attack.
And just bricking you.
Yes.
Badly.
So if you have a way to punch through one of Carlos's 1-drops, I would lead with the Noble. If not, I would lead with the Cackler.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility to see Flores find an opening hand with, you know, a red mana, a Strong Noble, a Rakdos Cackler, and maybe not a removal spell, and having actually being put to the test and the decision on, all right, which one of these do I play? Because as you said, you could see him. I think when you look at this deck, if I have to choose between Strong Noble and Rakdos Cackler, I'm just going to choose Noble because like it's the card that you're supposed to play on turn 1 to get the ball rolling, grow it, and then be able to push through guys. But if he plays a Deathrite Shaman, or heck, even if he plays an Arbor Elf, if that Noble comes in, I think we're going to see a block immediately. Especially if it's Arbor Elf, to just make that one for one trade and just keep moving along and let the game progress.
Yeah.
So that's a decision that does need to be made here. And again, one thing that we saw in that sideboarded game between Flores and Melchor, you know, we saw on Melchor's side, we saw his sideboarded cards, we saw Deathrite Shaman, we saw Abrupt Decay, we saw Centaur Healers, we know he's got the Fiend Hunter still in, we know he has the 3 Angel of Serenity still in, so all those cards are still there. We didn't see a single sideboard card from Flores.
Yes.
So it begs the question of, was there any sideboarding? Again, we saw a card, he has 2 main deck Domri Rods that we're not sure if he was going to leave them in or cut them out. He obviously left at least 1 in. You know, so are the Mark of Mutinies in? Are we going to see a card like Museum Mortars? Are we going to see Skullcrack? You can make an argument for like Trickery because most Chunk Reanimator decks nowadays do have those 8 mana accelerants and Arbor Elf and Avacyn's Pilgrim that do die from those. Some versions have Lingering Souls. We know that Melchor's version does not, but you can make the argument for having like Trickery in the deck as well. So are we going to see any of these sideboarded cards here from Flores? Is another question for this 3rd game.
Yeah, and you know, the presence of, maybe I overvalue this as a player, but the presence of Domri in my deck makes me loath to add situational or potentially mediocre spells.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sideboard cards that we're looking at that Flores has access to that are possible to bring in here, with the exception of our community, are on the mediocre side.
Yeah.
You know, Electrickery and Skullcrack, Museum Mortars, those cards have spots of being very powerful. Skullcrack can be really good against Rakdos sometimes. Electrickery can be really good against mana creatures and so on, but I think overall those cards are much more in the situational camp of being productive, and I would be very hesitant to add those cards to my deck if Domri's in. If you want to cut Domri, then all bets are off, and
sure.
You're much more inclined to just sort of add the stuff that you think could be good.
Sure.
But with Domri in the deck, I would stay away from bringing in those kind of cards.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Domri, of course, is Domri is this really interesting card because the power roll of this card is undeniable. You see a 3-mana Planeswalker, it's a Planeswalker that you can cast on turn 2, lets you fight, lets you draw cards if things go right. The power roll of this card is absolutely undeniable, but it is incredibly frustrating when you do not hit with the +1, and you have to stare a land or a spell that may not be so good right back in the face.
Yeah, and all the Domri decks that I've tried to build have been lands and creatures and Domri to try to maximize its power.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's necessarily the best base to be starting from, but I wonder, for example, his Madcap skills is certainly very powerful, but are you better off once you have Domri in your deck playing something like Rubble Balbaka or Slaughterhorn, so you just have more hits and something that can kind of replicate the functionality? I don't know, Madcap skills is clearly much more powerful in a vacuum, but I would err towards trying to play as many just creatures as possible once Domri's in the deck.
So Carlos has made it back. Michael is sitting patiently. He is ready. Both players are shuffling up for our 3rd and final game here. Again, if you guys are just joining us, we do appreciate you early here this morning. Grand Prix Miami. We took our talents to South Beach.
Yes.
That is not the first time I will say that this weekend.
I was about to say, I was wondering when reference 1 to that was going to come up.
First of probably 800 of taking our talents to South Beach here. We do appreciate you guys joining us. SCGLive has made it here. We'll be taking care of Grand Prix Miami for you guys all weekend long. You can join Patrick, Osip, and I on Twitter at SCGLive, hashtag GP Miami. We have 9 rounds for you today. We've got 6 rounds for you tomorrow, plus our elimination rounds. We've also got some fun things in store for you guys. Maybe a little preview card action, if you don't mind. We might have one of those for you guys from M14 if you stick with us over the course of the day. We wouldn't want you to miss it, and some other fun announcements as well. So it's going to be a fun weekend of 1250. It's no Grand Prix Vegas, but what is?
No, what could be?
Yeah, yeah. What could be is a good question. So Carlos taking a look, and Carlos is going to be in the draw, and Flores is going to be in the play, and both players are going down to 6 here. So as you see both players shuffling up, who do you think a mulligan favors? Because this question's asked a lot about who does a mulligan favor. You're mulliganing on the play, you know, you only have 6 cards, you're mulliganing on the draw, your draw step undoes the mulligan, but you're the aggressive deck, and you see your opponent going down to at least 6 cards, you're probably pretty happy, right?
I think that mulligans in general are going to favor Flores because the Junk Randomator deck, just because of its mana, has more draws that will simply fail.
Okay.
Because when they're going down to fewer and fewer cards, it's more likely that they just can't cast spells that are in their hand. Particularly with Carlos having multiple copies of Angel of Serenity in his deck still, I think these symmetrical mulligans favor Flores pretty significantly. What was also interesting, that was another hand that Flores threw back that was totally reasonable. I actually would have probably kept his hand. I believe he had 2 lands, Burning Tree Emissary, Flint Hoof Boar, Skullcrack, and 2 other spells, and no 1-drop. So Flores is definitely committed to trying to find a 1-drop here.
Yeah, definitely aggressively mulliganing right now. So I'm interested to see what the 6 is. You know, are we going to see maybe like a 1-land hand with a 1-drop hoping to draw an additional land? You know, how are things going to sit up here? Because one of the things that's difficult with this deck is, you know, you look at the 1-drops and we're putting a lot of importance on those cards. But again, we can't forget that, you know, Boris Reckoner and Hellrider are looming in this deck. So he does need to make his way to 4 mana to be able to cast what is arguably the best card in this deck and the thing that holds this strategy together in Hellrider.
Yes. Like I said, I was very surprised to see. And I was seeing the cards correctly. I'm very surprised by the hand that Flores threw back there because it looked reasonable to me. But if he's really hunting for 1-drops, then that's what he's doing.
Take a look at Melchor's hand over there. You see 4 lands. You see a Thraktusk and a Fiend Hunter. It looks like the necessary mana. And the 1-drop is here, and it's a Rakdos Cackler. So aggressively mulliganing for a 1-drop is Flores, and he does have one.
Got rewarded. And Melchor's looking at a hand of a bunch of lands. It appears a Fiend Hunter and a Thragtusk and lands is what I saw.
And some of those lands are the come into play tap lands. Overgrown Tomb coming in. Strongkirk Noble's here. Does he have a second land? He does. It's a Rootbound Crag. So going to come across for 2 is Flores. And we'll see if he's going to come up with the Noble this turn. He is. I'm just going to pass the turn back. So this is a very, very good start.
And there's Unburial Rites. And this is the fear, you know, Carlos's deck still has a lot of fidgety action in it. And is he going to be able to get on the board fast enough? No Deathrite Shaman, no Centaur Healer. Starting to take some hits here.
In for 3, and again, you see no Abrupt Decay this turn, and he just does pass the turn back. So it looks like he wants to leave up Skullcrack because Flores had the option. He had the option to cast Burning Tree Emissary that turn and did not. And Melchor looks like he played the incorrect land because it looks like he wanted to play a white land for the Fiend Hunter. He did not. So now Flores is going to come across here for 4. Going to knock Melchor down to 5, and again, just keeping up Skullcrack, not adding to his board.
Yeah, that was disastrous. That land there took an extra 3 points of damage, or 4 points of damage rather.
So a Fiend Hunter and an Arbor Elf. So coming back now a little bit. And so what spell are we going to cast and where's it going to go? So Searing Spear is going to take care of the Fiend Hunter, going to get the Noble back. And I think if you're Melchor, you're actually probably pretty happy with that. Yes. All things considered.
Yeah, it's you know, the Noble is very not likely to do a ton at this point now that we're going to start seeing Thragtusk get online.
And now the Noble isn't even attacking. So now, I mean, I think you're thrilled because, you know, Melchor ideally would probably just trade there, but he's not going to get to. And now Thragtusk is going to come down, but we know that Flores has been holding a Skullcrack, so he's going to invalidate that this go-around. But one thing he's not going to validate is a 5/3 body against a 2/2 and a 1/1.
Yep. Thragtusk is still huge. And now we might see it's very likely now Flores has been holding up these Burning Tree emissaries, holding up Skullcrack for so long, he's probably going to have a huge hand.
So now Searing Spear is going to take down that Thragtusk, but that is a huge risk. I mean, that's assuming that your opponent does not have Unburial Rites in his hand. But what card do you want to play around? Do you want to play around Restoration Angel, or do you want to play around Unburial Rites? That's the big question. And now he's deciding if he wants to attack, but there are no good attacks because of the Beast token. So now we just pass the turn back. Fiend Hunter's the draw here from Melchor, and we know he has an Unburial Rites in his hand, so I would be hard-pressed to see him not cast that this turn.
Yep. Now that you know that Skullcrack's a thing, when the shields are down, you got to stick your spot to get this Thragtusk in play.
And a 5/3 is going to own the battlefield, and so Unburial Rites, the front half of that is going to get cast. Thragtusk going to come back, no fear of Skullcrack because the mana is tapped, and so 5 life is going to be gained from Melchor. He's going to push himself up to 11, and he has the better board presence by a lot right now.
Here's he's just drawing another Skullcrack.
And this is the fear with Skullcrack, again, where you draw it in the wrong situation, and it's not very good. And you can even argue that the first Skullcrack changed the way that Flores played this game dramatically.
Yes. He could have, I mean, I understand wanting to, he's worried about Centaur Healer. I think when Carlos passed the third turn, even though he played the wrong land, he did have Centaur Healer mana and did not cast it. I think at that point you have to do something on your fourth turn, and then if you want to hold up Skullcrack the next turn when Thragtusk is a thing, that's fine, but I think he needed to add to his board at that point.
Yeah. And now, Melchor is getting aggressive, so he's just looking to turn the corner right now. Thragtusk and a Beast token are coming across the table now, so absolutely no fear of the creatures over there on Flores' side. And Flores, I mean, a lot of times you hear this when you're playing a red deck. If you're blocking, that's not good. If you're blocking, you're losing. Well, is typically what is said.
Sometimes you can be winning if you're chump blocking. If you're ever double blocking, you're losing.
Yeah, yeah. As a red mage,
yes.
Have you ever double blocked playing red? Has it ever come to that?
I don't know if I've ever double blocked in a game that I've won. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly double blocked, but it has a strong relationship with losing the game. A chump block here and there, yeah, for sure.
So now a second Thragtusk going to show up. Here's a Skullcrack. Going to make it so Melchor's going to go down to 8, not to get to gain any life and just pass the turn back. But 5/3s are reigning supreme against a Rakdos Cackler. There's a Mark of Mutiny. Showing up a little bit late here as Flores is just stuck on 2 lands. You see his hand. He has Flint of Core, Domri Rad, Mark of Mutiny, and Hellrat in his hand, but not the lands to cast the final 3, and has to just pass the turn back because, again, no good attacks, and that Cackler looking very useless now.
Yeah.
And again, this just shows the fact that, again, aggressively mulliganing I think is perfectly reasonable. I think that Flores did the right thing there by doing that, as Fiend Hunter is going to take down the Flint of Core, and Thragtusk are going to come to the red zone. But you have to capitalize on that aggressive mulligan. You have to just keep pushing the fence on, especially when your opponent mulligans, and Centaur Healer is going to gain Melchor 3 life and push him back to 11 and pass the turn. You can't, like, I don't think you can do what Flores did here and hold Burning Tree Emissary for a better spot. It's not going to get better past turn 2.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, you know, this is another thing here is just the number of spells in Flores' deck, I think, is also challenging for him to get off to the starts he needs to be creature dense and threaten the board as quickly as possible. And I think he got trapped a little bit by the number of Searing Spears and Skullcracks that he had access to in this game.
Flores is going to go down to 3 here via Temple Garden. A makeshift way to be able to actually cast Boros Reckoner. Here's a Mark of Mutiny. It's going to take a Thragtusk. It's going to get a +1/+1 counter. And after that does resolve, we may see an attack here with a Thragtusk come across to the red zone along with that Cackler, but you see blocks are going to take place very, very quickly here. And Michael Flores is going to concede the game, so Carlos Melchor is going to win round 1 here, Grand Prix Miami, 2-1. Junk Reanimator does defeat Red-Green Aggro, and I think that's not going to be the last